in terms of what the peace movement needs to do, we need to do tax resistance, as at least you all are doing. We need to work on conversion. We need to work on counter-recruitment. We need to get rid of drones, as we're building some momentum for in places like Charlottesville and the state of Virginia, which is now banning drones with some loopholes for 2 years. But we do also need to say no to each new war as it comes up. And right now we need to be saying no to a war on Syria. We need to be saying it as loudly as we said no to a war on Iraq. And if you imagine that wars are rational affairs based on realpolitik and serious strategic calculations, just look at how many people are telling Obama he must go to war with Syria because he threatened to. And if a president threatens to go to war and then doesn't, the world collapses. The United States is not feared any longer, and we must be feared. A war, an escalated war in Syria, a US-NATO war in Syria will be worse than anything it could possibly prevent. And the idea that if you believe the hype, if you believe people are being killed by the wrong side with chemical weapons, the idea that that justifies going in and killing more people in greater numbers with cluster bombs and napalm and depleted uranium and Hellfire missiles so that they're killed with the right kind of weapons is outrageous. And I saw an article today making the case that Iraq is worse than Syria at the moment. Iraq has, greater violence than Syria at the moment. But nobody wants to go rescue Iraq, because how would that look? Right? So this is not rational. We have the chairman of the Progressive Caucus in Congress saying we need a safe zone, we need a no-fly zone, we need to move in to Syria to protect people with war. I mean, we used to at least have the chairman or chairwoman of this thing doing the right thing, even if they would never whip any of their colleagues. Now we're not even at that point. I think what we need is a no arming zone. We need a zone in which Russia doesn't arm one side and we and our buddies don't arm the other side. This is what we need in Syria. I'll make one more point, and that is Libya is being held up as the example for Syria by the people who want to go into Syria. And the people who are against attacking Syria, for the most part, are ignoring Libya as if that was a good war. Right? I mean, the Pentagon's spending $65 million to beautify the image of the Vietnam War. Right? I mean, there's always the ongoing fight over history. But Libya, we can't get right, and it just happened. Right? And I don't know how much time you all spend on Twitter, but I spend more time than I should. And I saw a tweet from an author named, I don't need to name him, but a tweet from an author who had a great case against going into Syria. And I said, why didn't you mention Libya? It would help your case. And he tweeted back and said, well, I was in Libya last summer and it's doing fine. And so I sent him links to a bunch of articles about the disaster in Libya last summer up to the present. And he wrote back and said, tweeted back a little message. Every nation has problems. Libya is the same as any other country. And so I went to Google News, and what's the first story I find on Libya? Nations of Africa afraid of violence spilling out from Libya. Next story, violence that overflowed Libya into Mali, now flowing back into Libya. So just for fun, I put in Norway. What's the first story I find? Norway is doing so much of this, compostable dining that they don't have any trash to burn anymore, and they're worried about where they can find trash. Not exactly the same. Wow. So at some point, we have to work on getting the history right, even when it's the really, really recent history, even when it's, what just came out. When the New York Times put on its cover, the president goes through a list of people every Tuesday picking who to kill, and it was talked about on all the television stations, the White House knew that only the people who wanted to see that were going to see that. And the people who didn't want to see it weren't going to form the right opinion about it. They were going to not see it. And when President Obama came, and this is before the election, this is a president wanting it known that he kills people before an election. This is what the lack of accountability during the Bush-Cheney era did to us. And when President Obama came to Charlottesville, Virginia to speak, and people were lined up for a quarter mile to get in, we made flyers that looked like official event flyers, and we went and gave them to everybody in line. And they would read them and then crumple them up and throw them at us, or stop and think or ask questions. And we tried to discuss with these people the kill list, the murder program, the drones, that none of them had ever heard of it. Right? And so when we went and protested in the event and got thrown out, we protested the war in Afghanistan because people had heard of Afghanistan. Right? So the selective consumption of information is a huge hurdle that we're up against. But if there's anybody who can take on this kind of project, it's you guys. And I'm just honored to be in the room with you, and I'd love to open this up to any discussion, questions, comments, rants, disagreement. Thanks. Please.
My mentor 50 years ago was Ammon Hennessy, a Catholic worker who had refused to register as an 18-year-old boy for World War I and served 2 years in Atlanta Penitentiary. Then was eligible and refused to register for World War II. As a social worker from Milwaukee, quit his job and went out and became a field worker in Arizona so that he wouldn't have taxes withheld from an agricultural worker for World War II. And your discussion of the movement in the 20s has helped me to understand better one of his great one-liners that he used in all of his talks. He was a vegetarian and never ate meat. He didn't like to kill animals. And he used to say, they were pacifists between wars. He says, it's like being a vegetarian between meals. And that's what you described.
Well, the number of people who rapidly became in favor of war when World War II got going was remarkable. I mean, the principled people who didn't were most remarkable. But there was a huge conversion from advocates for the abolition of war to advocates for World War II.
And the Peace Pledge Union in Britain, probably more stronger than the movement in the 1920s in the United States, possibly. Peace Pledge Union, it totally collapsed.
As with World War I before it. Coleman and then, okay. You, sir, and then.
Well, one thing you don't understand is that is how Zionism is driving these wars. Iraq was wrecked for Israel. And if you want to hear from the Israelis themselves, I gave it to you on the back of this poem. Nothing unusual happened to us won the World Series. In this little bit here, quoting Chuck Colson, who was told by the Prime Minister of Israel that the Iraq War was made for Israel. And that's the way it's been. And you can go back, I don't know how far, maybe to build up the French Revolution. But you can document it very easily from the time of World War, what I call the First Great War for Israel, 1914-18. One example of which is that Louis Brandeis instructed his nephew Frankfurter, when who were going to accompany Morgenthau to Turkey, to take Turkey out of the war, under no circumstances to allow that mission to succeed, because the Zionists were using the British to destroy the Ottoman Empire in order to move up the Zionist plans for Israel, which is just one example. And before World War I was over, if you call it World War I, the Rothschilds were Hitler programming their cousin Hitler to put him in power to do the things he did. Drive Jews out of the Germans into Palestine, start World War II and kill the Jews. So, and behind that you got the Kellogg-Briand Pact, which means the Kellogg-Briand Pact meant nothing. The people who were driving the war got the wars they wanted. And partly they got it because of patriotism. So if we don't attack patriotism, we can't resist it.
Can I more or less agree with you, except for the bit about you don't understand? Because if we, in particular, the last bit, if we don't deal with patriotism, if we don't deal with nationalism, we're done for. If we don't deal with support the troops and respect for the armed forces. When Kennedy wrote to his friend and said, we will have wars until the conscientious objectors have all the prestige and the respect that the soldiers have, he was right, but you have to add "and until the soldiers don't have it," and just the conscientious objectors do. But I think it's important what you say about Israel as well. I mean, Israel was pushing the worst so-called intelligence in the lead up to the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Israel has been pushing a war agenda on the United States for many years, but these neocons that produced the project on the New American Century and drove the Bush-Cheney era and today's or heavily influenced and in some cases involved with and working for Israel. And we are giving billions of dollars a year to a nation that seems to be modeling its behavior on our genocide of our native people in this country. I mean, this is what we're doing. We have to rethink this. But any time that you say, this is the reason for a war, you're missing dozens of reasons for that war. It is never a single reason. It is never that simple. There are people who love the joy of war, either for themselves or for other people's children. There are people who profit from war. There are people who push war for electoral reasons or to fund their campaigns. There are people who believe half the garbage and want to advance their careers. There are people who want their show to have higher ratings on television. And there are oil companies that want the oil. So, I mean, the meeting that Dick Cheney held with the heads of the oil companies, the weapons makers weren't in the room, Israel wasn't in the room, but war was decided on. And so there are usually quite a few reasons, almost always not a single one of them any good.